Good evening, everyone. It's really good to have an in-house audience tonight, something we missed with our TUC Talks in the last season, but something that I think will make this event a little bit more real and engaging for the speaker, because energy back is always good for a conversation that matters. I want to also welcome those who have made time tonight to join us by Zoom and by Facebook, and to those who will be intentionally finding this video on Facebook in the hours ahead and the days ahead. I know of a couple people who are expecting to watch it later, one of them actually who's joining us from British Columbia. So welcome all of you. I'm convinced that we'll have a lovely evening together. This is the first TUC Talk for the 2021-22 season. Although it's the first and might feel like news to you, the committee has been working on this particular season and the list of speakers for about 6 months, and are really pleased with what's ahead. So I want to take this opportunity to thank the committee, particularly Lynn Sheridan and Tom Disney, who've been leading us through this process the last couple of years to improve every event so that it reaches more people and reaches the people who might be interested in the conversation. So for this evening, welcome to Trinity. My name is Donna Turner. I'm the minister here. It's a privilege to be able to host these events. If you're in-house and suddenly feel nature's call, just want to let you know there's a washroom right through those doors and to the left at the end of the room. Feel free to move about if you need to. A couple of things about the question and answer period. There's a mic right here on the floor, and Tom, who's here, will direct people to the mic in order so that the questions can be asked. And we also want to honor those people who are interested in asking questions through Facebook or Zoom. And so I have 2 devices that are on in the pew, and I will be watching the questions and will mix the questions as they seem fitting for the Q&A time. I think those are the messages that I wanted to offer. But I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to congratulate the Honourable Sean Fraser, Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, and to tell him how thrilled we are that his first at-home event since being named minister is at Trinity United Church for our TUC Talks. Sean is going to have the privilege of introducing our speaker.
Hello and thank you, everyone. And look, it's good to be home. I just got back about an hour and a half ago from Ottawa, and it's absolutely thrilling to be here for the first official event in this new capacity. And I think it's important for me to remember that though you may have a new gig, you're still a member of Parliament, and attending community events and taking part in things at home is something that I have always very much enjoyed. And thank you very much for the invitation to join here tonight. I'm thrilled about the conversation that we're going to get to have. I'm thrilled about the conversations that TUC Talks have been providing to the community over the past while here. You know, the slogan of our first campaign back in 2015 was that conversations matter, and I think, I believe for TUC Talks is it from great things come from great conversations. Am I close? Anyway, it's something I honestly believe, and one of the things that we get to have a wonderful conversation about tonight is going to include housing. This is something that's become a pressing need right across the country, across Nova Scotia, and here in our own communities. What we've seen over the course of this pandemic with more and more people moving to Nova Scotia, which can be a wonderful thing for our communities, particularly when they're moving to smaller communities. It brings new people, it brings wealth to our communities, it brings a new dynamic with families moving to the area, but it also creates pressing challenges for our communities, particularly around housing. I think anybody here who drives up and down a street will see for sale signs coming down as quick as they're going up. And it creates a real challenge, both in terms of housing affordability, but affordable housing as well. I'm thrilled to see a few faces in the room that I have had conversations with in recent months, trying to get some initiatives off the ground here in Pictou County to build more housing stock, particularly for low-income families that can't afford market rents, so they too have an opportunity to continue to live and enjoy the community that they've come to love. But I'm not the guest speaker tonight. My job is to introduce the guest speaker tonight, and it's my absolute pleasure to be introducing Paulie MacIntosh. She is an experienced adult educator and facilitator who is leading the development of StFX University Extension Department's Community Housing Program, which is supporting community-based groups, coalitions, and organizations working to ensure adequate, safe, accessible, and affordable housing is available in Nova Scotia for people living on low incomes. Pauline also leads Build Together, Strengthening the Community Housing Sector in Nova Scotia project, and believes that by working together we can achieve more, better, and faster for greater collective impact. Pauline sees housing through the lens of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 as an important part of this work. I'm so thrilled to introduce the guest speaker for tonight, Pauline MacIntosh. Thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you to the Honourable Member and now Minister, Mr. Fraser, for your kind words of introduction and congratulations. Good evening to all who are here with us at Trinity United Church this evening, and to all who are joining online, and in particular, my mother, who is listening from home, no doubt pulled up to the kitchen table alongside a nice fire burning in her wood stove. Before I begin this evening's talk, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered here in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I am grateful for the peace and friendship treaties, and I acknowledge that we are all treaty people. I would also like to thank Trinity United Church and the organizers of the TUC Talks for inviting me to be with you. This is clearly an incredible group of people who are not only committed to their faith community, but also to the much larger community in which they live and whom they serve. Thank you. So before I get to the business of talking about affordable housing this evening, I'm tempted to share with you a little story about something that happened a couple of years ago. So before the pandemic, there was a church in my area, the beautiful community of Pumpket in Antigonish County, that was having a fundraiser. And the nature of the fundraiser was a church concert. So how many of you know Bruce Guthrow? Quite a few, I'm sure, have heard the name. So Bruce came out on the stage probably, 5 to 7 minutes after the appointed time. So everyone was waiting with bated breath for the concert to start. And in his hand, he had a glass of wine. He sang a song, and his first remark afterward was, "When I left the vestry, this was water." And I asked the good folks here at Trinity United if I could have some water, because I do tend to get a dry throat. And I thought maybe tonight's the night that this is going to happen for me. But folks, it's still water. But that's okay. You'll have to pardon me if I take a sip from time to time. Now, affordable housing. I'll try to do this without glasses because I can't really see both the paper and you, and I prefer to see you, so I'll see if I can make it. A family of 5 live in a camper, and winter is coming. They have nowhere to go. A young man suffers from an invisible disability. With support, he could live independently. He has a part-time job in his community, but he has nowhere to go. A single mother with 2 young children, with the support of her family, completes a post-secondary education program and finds a good job in her community, one that pays reasonably well. But she cannot find a place for her family to live. She cannot accept the job offer. She leaves her community and her support system behind and moves elsewhere to find housing. Please think for a moment. Do you know anyone struggling to find a home? Anyone who is insecurely housed at the moment? Sadly, I expect that if I asked you to put up your hand, many hands would be raised in this room. According to Statistics Canada, Census of Population 2016 and a national household survey, and these numbers are getting a bit old, waiting for the new ones to drop. In Canada, almost 1.7 million people are considered to be in core housing needs. And core housing need essentially means they're inadequately housed and don't have the resources or the opportunity to change that particular circumstance. Also in 2016, housing affordability in Canada was at its worst in 27 years, and nearly 13% of Nova Scotia households were living in core housing need. It has become clear that there is an indisputable housing crisis in Nova Scotia, in Canada, and in many parts of the world. To bring this closer to home, earlier today, I learned from Anita Stewart, who is the coordinator of the Roof Over Your Head Housing Support Program in Antigonish, this is earlier today, that there are 52 names on her list of people who are either housing insecure or homeless in Antigonish and Guysborough counties, with the bulk of these 52 people in Antigonish County. 52 people. So what's happening at the community level to address this situation? Approximately 10 years ago, a knock came on my office door, and it was my then colleague, Pauline Cameron, whom I'm sure some of you in the room know well. Pauline came to my office, sat down, and said, "I have a question to ask you. I'm wondering if you would like to join the board of the Antigonish Affordable Housing Society. Having an interest in construction, home design, as well as community, I immediately said yes and asked if I could be on the building committee. With a wink, Pauline said, "Yes, sure, no problem." After only a couple of board meetings, I realized it was going to be quite some time before anyone had to pick out paint colors for the walls of the homes we were about to build. First, we had to build a strong foundation for the organization. We had to increase community awareness about the need for affordable housing, and we had to raise funds and acquire financing to do the work we set out to do. It took time, but I am proud to say that in 2017, we constructed 4 new homes. You'll see the member was in the room for the grand opening, cutting of the ribbon. The following year, we constructed 10 homes with a 1,500 square foot community room. In January of 2022, so this coming January, we will welcome tenants into 12 more newly constructed homes, also with a community room on site. And we hope to create more housing for residents of Antigonish Town and County in the not-too-distant future. As you heard in the introduction, I work with the StFX Extension Department, and Extension has a very long history of supporting the development of housing for communities led by communities. In fact, StFX Extension facilitated the development of the very first cooperative housing community in Nova Scotia. You can probably see on this quite aged picture before you that there are a group of gentlemen sitting around a table with some mock-ups of homes, and there's one woman sitting at that table, and her name was Mary Arnold. Mary Arnold came to Canada from the United States because of her connection with Father Moses Cody and Father James Tompkins, many of whom call him Father Jimmy. I understand from history that he didn't like that, so I'm committed to calling him Father James Tompkins. And Mary Arnold was invited by them to come and work for the StFX Extension Department. She went to a community in Cape Breton called Reserve Mines in 1937, and 2 years later, residents had erected the first 10 cooperative homes in the province. This development became known as Tompkinsville, named for Father James Tompkins, a leader in the adult education and collective action movement stewarded by Extension called the Antigonish Movement. Extension continued to play a role in housing until the late 1970s, some of which happened right here in Pictou County. So, what's StFX Extension's role in housing at the moment? In 2018, StFX Extension partnered with the Antigonish Affordable Housing Society to host a provincial gathering, a People's School. And a People's School is a traditional method of the Antigonish movement, an educational forum that starts with the knowledge and the expertise of the people in the room related to a contemporary issue of concern. And we held the first People's School in 2018 on affordable housing. People came from across the province on a really blustery, I think it was March 24th day, to discuss their vision for affordable housing in Nova Scotia. The following year, Extension partnered again with the Antigonish Affordable Housing Society and a newly formed group in Cape Breton, the Straight Richmond Housing Matters Coalition, along with Dr. Catherine Leviton-Reid, who is an incredible housing researcher based at Cape Breton University, to host a second People's School. And this time, the focus was on building community research capacity to support housing goals. At the Civic Centre in Port Hawkesbury, again on a Saturday, a meeting room filled with people from across the province to offer their expertise and to learn more about this important aspect of affordable housing. As this work continued, more communities sought support from Extension to assist with local housing concerns, and Extension, once again, has a community housing program. As the housing crisis became more apparent and urgent, in late 2019, Extension was approached to partner with a pan-Canadian organization called the Community Housing Transformation Centre. And we were asked to design and lead a provincial engagement process focused on strengthening the community housing sector. And for the purpose of this work, community housing is defined as cooperative and other forms of nonprofit housing. So not dealing with private or public housing, but cooperative and other nonprofit housing work. And this work began in earnest in January of 2020. And then, before we knew it, the coronavirus pandemic was upon us. the housing crisis became even more serious. Now, the Build Together project came into existence because of a strong desire to scale, to escalate, and to strengthen the work of the community housing sector, because it provides and creates housing for people who live on low income without having to achieve a profit margin, essentially. It exists for social good. It largely happens as a result of volunteer efforts in communities, and it's seen as an essential component to an overall solution to the housing crisis. But again, we were in 2020. So I want to ask folks in the audience at that time, who knows what this picture is? Donna?
Yes, I do. That's the park that was being torn down earlier this fall. Maybe late summer.
Yeah. Yes, so Donna's describing this as a park that was occupied by homeless people in Halifax this past summer. Did anyone else in the room see pictures like this? Maybe show of hands? Yeah, so everyone's got their hand up. It became something that we were keenly aware of this summer and into the fall and the autumn. Great. Now, if I could show this picture, can you tell me what this is? Nothing? Nothing? What do you think this slide might represent?
No replacement for those homes.
No replacement for those homes? Yeah. Anyone else? This is a trickier one, isn't it?
Open space for possibility.
Ah, I see we have some optimists in the room. That's fantastic. This slide could also represent the invisible homelessness. The homelessness we don't see. The folks we see living in the housing encampments, the people we see on the streets who don't have homes, that's the homelessness we tend to think about, that comes to mind for us quickly. There are many people who are precariously housed or homeless that we don't see. They could be youth who are couch surfing at their friends' parents' houses. They don't really have anywhere to unpack, but they move from friend to friend to friend. They could be people who are institutionalized because there's no place in the community for them to live. They could be people who are living rough in the woods that we don't see when we go out and go about our daily chores. Housing is a crisis in our province and in our country. And yet, there is hope. The hope comes in many forms. For me, it comes from the work that I'm doing with a group of concerned citizens in Guysborough County who've come together simply because they care and they want to contribute to a solution. And they've engaged in a community-based research project. They're also looking at homelessness and precarious housing through the lens of African Nova Scotian community members, as they see those communities disappearing in Guysborough County, in part because it's an aging population, and also because there aren't sufficient homes for people or to attract people back to the community. I also see hope in the numerous housing coalitions that have taken shape across the province, whether it's in Cape Breton or Digby or the Strait area in Halifax. They're popping up everywhere, and they're populated by people who care. I see hope by the actions that are being taken by all levels of government. Our municipal partners, our provincial government, our federal government are all talking about the housing crisis, and they're trying to find ways forward that will lead to solutions. I see hope in the Build Together project that I just described to you. I see hope in strengthening the community housing sector in this province. We are absolutely committed to engaging the people most affected by this issue and the people who support them most closely. And in the Build Together project, so far, we have reached 332 people who work or volunteer in Nova Scotia's community housing sector. We've been able to identify 206 community housing sector groups, and these are both informal and formal housing groups. They could include networks, coalitions, nonprofit, and cooperative housing providers. I'm also inspired that 343 people who don't work directly in housing have come out to contribute to this discussion. And they could be other nonprofits whose mandate is not housing, but housing intersects so closely with all of their work that it's of huge concern to them. They could be other service providers, consultants, researchers, elected officials, and like I said, concerned citizens. I'm also filled with hope because of the values that people have articulated throughout the Build Together process. I was in a room yesterday with 25 people in Truro, with another 12 joining us through Zoom, and we talked for 3 hours about working with underrepresented groups and the values that have to underpin any of these efforts going forward. And I'm going to say what they are because I think they're really important. They're diversity and inclusion of first voice representation in the community housing sector. People believed in equitable access and opportunity for both rural and urban community housing organizations. They believe in ending racism and stigma. Racism and stigma that limit access to affordable community-based housing for everyone. They believe in access to affordable housing as a human right. And also provision of funding and programs to provide navigation and support services to vulnerable people and groups. So people not only need accessible, appropriate, and safe housing, they often need supports to live well in those housing developments. We often call these wraparound services. I also want to say a little bit about the opportunities that people have articulated for the community housing sector as part of the Build Together project. Many people said the light is shining on the housing crisis more than it ever has before. And that gives us an opportunity to think really strategically about the work that we're doing. We don't have to do it the same way that it's always been done before. Let's really think about how we can make this work for the long haul in a sustainable manner that gives people dignity to live well in their communities. They also saw an incredible opportunity to raise awareness about housing issues, to foster attitudinal change that will help the work of the sector, to focus on environmental sustainability, to access targeted funding programs, and to one of which is the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation funding. People also articulated what they see as changes that need to happen in the sector to enable them to do their work better, smarter, and faster. And the main area is capacity building. How do we increase the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes of the people doing this work so that they can achieve more and provide more housing options for people who need them? There was a strong desire to collaborate and coordinate with others who are doing work in the sector, and this could lead to the formation of some sort of provincial entity. There was a need to look at funding and how funding is distributed throughout the system for the work that's happening in the sector. There was a need to look at policy development and, again, a need to be really clear about the inclusion of first voice, ending racism and stigma, looking at housing as a human right, and ensuring that the proper supports exist for the people who require this housing. I am also hopeful because of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Has anyone here heard about the UN's SDGs, they're often called? They're not so well known as the housing crisis, I'll admit. They're a little further afield, but the United Nations has come up with 17 goals for supporting sustainable development worldwide. And in these goals, there's a tremendous opportunity to address affordable housing as we move forward. The United Nations has also put forward Agenda 2030, and a very quick synopsis of that agenda is to leave no one behind, to ensure that all members of society have an equal and equitable opportunity to live well, to thrive, and to succeed as members of our society. And more specifically related to the Sustainable Development Goals, there are a number that fall of those 17 that I see as intersecting really nicely with my work in affordable housing. And they include decreasing poverty, improved health outcomes, affordable and clean energy, and, oh my goodness, sustainability. I should have to put the glasses on for just a second. I know it, but availability and stability of affordable housing. So these goals all wrapped up help us to look at housing through a different lens. And I'll just give you one quick example. The work that we're doing with the Antigonish Affordable Housing Society, and I should mention that as a volunteer, I sit on that board. Our objective is to make sure that if we have an opportunity to build again, that we will achieve net zero in terms of energy use. So we're not just creating homes with social programs and with building community. We're trying to create a sustainable model that will decrease energy costs for the people who live there so that they have more income choices. They have more choices in terms of what they use their income for, and hopefully to help them live well and thrive. In addition to hope, there is also inspiration. Every day, I interact with someone who is moving mountains to help people living in need of housing support or housing. I mentioned that yesterday I was working with folks in this field in Truro. The meeting was held at a hotel, and just before the workshop started, a woman came up to me whom I hadn't met before, and she said, "I wasn't invited to be here, but I wonder if I can join in the discussion. It's really relevant to me." And I said, "Sure, absolutely." And she said, "Well, don't you want to know more about me?" And I said, "Whatever you'd like to share." And she's someone who is currently homeless, and she's living in the hotel. She is the first voice that we are working to support in all of these efforts. And it was a tremendous reminder that we need to have first voice in our discussions as we find solutions going forward. I was also inspired that for one of the first times in my career, I feel like underrepresented groups are having a bigger say in these conversations. We have a lot of work to do. We have a long way to go to really be inclusive and to open spaces that are not just welcoming and safe, that are co-created by underrepresented groups and communities. So we're sometimes in some ways throwing out the old way of doing things and being open to simply creating spaces with others for everyone in the room and making sure that everyone has a voice in what that looks like. I'm inspired that people are really beginning to see housing as a human right, which is legislated. It's not just something we hope for, but in Canada, in this country, people have a right to housing. That's inspiring. I'm inspired that government is beginning to see and support the need to provide wraparound services for people who need housing. This is inspiring. The media are helping to keep this issue alive, to keep the light shining on the housing crisis. We cannot let the housing crisis fade with the pandemic. People are coming together to help and support each other and to support systems change. So changing policy, changing programs, changing the way we provide support, changing the way we allocate resources. And these changes will make impacts that will benefit the people who are most affected by the housing crisis, people who live on low income, people who are precariously housed, people who are homeless. To borrow from the old saying, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, our communities are only as strong as our most vulnerable members. And affordable housing has a tremendous potential to strengthen communities for all of us. And just before I leave you this evening, I'm going to test this water once again. Nope, it's still water. And with that, I thank you for your attention. I thank you for being here. And of course, I welcome any questions or comments you may have. And I think Donna would like anyone who has questions to maybe come to the mic at the center of the sanctuary. And Tom's going to help facilitate that.
Thank you very much for that. It was excellent. This is such a complicated problem.
Yes.
And it is a problem at so many different levels. But for those who are most vulnerable, we have an immediate winter is here.
Yes.
Can you comment on that and what's happening to the people? I've learned recently about, unfortunately, significant numbers of homeless people here in town and in Pictou County, and I'm wondering what outreach might be available for them in the very short term.
Mm-hmm. That's a really important question. The nights are getting colder, the days are getting shorter, and people are still living rough, and they're still living in very precarious conditions. While shelters are not a long-term solution to our housing crisis, there are temporary shelters that certainly help out with this. Most recently, during the pandemic, they're often taking the form of hotels. We know that they're being set up in an arena in Dartmouth, I believe. So while I don't work providing support specifically to people who are homeless, that's a very specific skill set that's required to do that work, although I think we're seeing more and more people with much less experience now engaged in that process. But I think there's definitely a need for communities to come together, anyone who can provide support, working with people with expertise in that area to try to develop solutions that will get people off the streets and get people who are living rough into proper shelter for the winter months at the very least. I would think that if you spoke with folks who are doing this work in your local community, hopefully there would be a willingness to come together and address that. We absolutely have to take action and to make sure that people aren't left in those vulnerable conditions as the winter months come upon us. Yeah. I'm sorry I can't offer anything more direct. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can explain what the difference is between cooperative housing and something like public housing.
Okay, so what's the difference between cooperative housing and public housing? Public housing is most often operated by the state, by our government, and would be managed and run by organizations like Housing Nova Scotia. I think we have a person here who works with Housing Nova Scotia in the room, and that housing is considered public, and you probably have to go on a waiting list and meet particular criteria in order to be eligible for that kind of housing. Cooperative housing, on the other hand, is created by the people who are going to live there. And there are cooperative ownership models as well as cooperative rental models. But the people who live in the housing cooperative would have a say in how those homes are run, those complexes. They would have a voice in all of the discussions that include the management of the facility, as well as the uptake, the programming that they may or may not wish to have. They just have a lot more ownership and probably much more influence on how the situation is run. They may also own the asset if it's a cooperative ownership model, but would certainly have a vested interest in the ongoing running and sustainability of the housing development, even as a renter cooperative. Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any questions that came over the internet? No?
So I may be wrong, but is there an organization in St. Andrews in Antigonish County that's doing an interesting project about affordable housing, or am I confusing that with something else?
No, you're not confused.
Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think that lots of us would love to know about models that work in other communities so that we might be able to think about how that might work in our community.
Sure. It's interesting that you ask about St. Andrews because I live in a community between St. Andrews and Antigonish called Lower South River. So it's very, very close. And I went to school from primary to grade 3 in Lower South River and then went to the big school in St. Andrews for grades 4 to 6. So St. Andrews is an incredible community with lots of local leadership, and they've been able to accomplish a tremendous amount in terms of community infrastructure. And one piece of that infrastructure is the St. Andrews Seniors Housing, SASHA, St. Andrews Seniors Housing Association. And the community came together many, many years ago and decided that it was important for them to ensure there was a place in their community for their seniors to live when they were at that time when they wanted to leave their own homes. So the community came together without any government funding at all, if I'm remembering this correctly, and I think I am, and through volunteer efforts, possibly through some fundraising. I hadn't quite moved back to the community at that time. They constructed housing units, and a number of years ago they expanded the complex, and it's run as a nonprofit association. It's not a cooperative, but a nonprofit association, and they have a board that provides governance for the organization, and it's a beautiful place. We do an annual Christmas tree lighting there every year. There is a lot of opportunity for socializing within the complex. I'm sure it does a great deal to lessen the social isolation of seniors. It's located in the center of the community of St. Andrews. Recently, they've widened the shoulder of the road, so it's safer for the seniors to walk to the local store, the post office, the school, the church. And it's a really incredible story of what a community can achieve on its own. A number of years ago, the community actually received an award for the Nova Scotia Lieutenant Governor's Award for Community Spirit, not just for the construction of the Seniors Housing Association, but also for the construction and running of their curling facility, which is community-owned, as well as a community center, and a number of other number of other accomplishments that have made them really stand out. And in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, at the Seniors Housing Association, they've just opened a solar garden. So they too are making the move to be much more environmentally friendly and sustainable, which leads to more cost effectiveness for the people who live there as well. Yeah. I don't know if it's a...
I have a question for you. What would you... There are three types of government: municipal, provincial, and federal.
Yeah.
I like the idea that you're talking about a ground-up type of model.
Mm-hmm.
What are the roles of the other two parts of the government, rather than municipal?
Sure. Well, I would like to say about municipal that in Antigonish Town and County, both of our municipal bodies have been very supportive of the work of the Antigonish Affordable Housing Society. And I certainly think that they see it as a huge asset to the community, and it's one that they may not necessarily have the capacity to do on its own, so they're able to support it in different ways. Of course, we would like to see that support continue to grow and expand so that we are able to do more. On the provincial level, we've certainly had the Nova Scotia Affordable Housing Commission work that happened and was released last May. And in that report, there are, I believe, I can't recall if it's 13 or 17 recommendations. And that report is dealing with public housing, private housing, community housing, and a number of different aspects of housing work, including looking at the role of municipalities and how they might be able to play a greater supportive role for this work. Our most recent, our new government in Nova Scotia released its housing strategy last week, and they have identified a number of programs that can be implemented very, very quickly in order to support the work, to increase the amount of stock, housing stock that's available in the province. Of course, these things take time. You know, we can't just build 1,100 new homes overnight. So there is a bit of gearing up that has to happen for that, but hopefully it will be created much sooner than later. We also know that the cap on rent increases that was put in place during the emergency period associated with the pandemic has been extended until the end of 2023. And a number of other programs are on offer, some of which definitely will support the community housing sector going forward. Our federal government, I feel a little bit awkward talking about that with our new minister in the room, but certainly the Canadian federal government has recognized the housing crisis long before the pandemic. And that was of note in November of 2019 when the National Housing Strategy was announced. And at that time, the federal government earmarked a tremendous amount of money to support addressing the housing crisis across the country. A tremendous amount of money, but still not enough money that would touch it all, because it's expansive. The issue is huge. And a lot of programs were announced at that time, many of which local organizations have been able to work with. There are still some challenges in accessing that funding, and I'm sure Minister Fraser is very aware of those. But each time a call is put out, we're seeing incremental improvements. The application process to acquire some of those funds is very, very demanding, cumbersome, and complex. But we hope that over time, and we've certainly been asked, and I think that the federal government is listening, and I think that those accessibility issues will hopefully diminish in time as we all get used to doing this work. But certainly the federal government has been providing leadership in addressing the housing crisis, and none of it is enough. None of it is enough. I think we're all going to have to do our part. And a former director at Extension used to say, in the work that we do, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. Thinking about the Tompkins and the Codys and the Sister Marie Michaels and all of the Sister Irene Doyle, and all of the tremendous women and men who came before us doing this work, but I really believe there are giants in all of our communities. I believe there are giants in this room, and I believe that there's a tremendous amount that we can accomplish working together.
There's two questions here from the Zoom participants, which I'd like to ask. The first question from a Zoom participant named Bill is, can you explain or define more clearly affordable housing? And the second question is from Kathy, who says, what can I do?
Okay. Thank you, Bill and Kathy, for your questions. In terms of affordable housing, the widely understood definition is that housing is not affordable if you are paying more than 30% of your gross income to cover it. And of course, this is a term that's widely disputed, but my answer to that is it's relative. If I'm making, as for a round number, $100,000 a year, then 30% of my gross income can allow me to attain housing. If I'm making $20,000 a year on an income supplement program, then 30% of my gross income will not allow me to attain any kind of housing at all. So it is considered to be 30% of your gross income, but I always add the caveat that that's a relevant term and a relevant measure that has to be looked at very carefully, not just in terms of the person, but in terms of the context. What's affordable in your particular geographic area, whether it's urban, rural, what are the typical rates of pay for employment in your area? There's a whole magnitude of questions that need to be asked to get a true sense of affordability. And Kathy's question was, what can she do as a person to support this work? I think there are a number of things that we can do on an individual level. The first one that comes to mind to me is that there are always opportunities to go out and support the work of organizations who are trying to address this issue. There's a huge need for volunteers. That is in itself a little bit a part of the problem, that a lot of this work is being done by volunteers. So inadvertently, we're supporting the broken system by making it appear as if it's working better than it is, I suppose. But that aside, we need to deal with what's in front of us at this time. So there's always an opportunity for us to bring our gifts, our knowledge, our expertise to the work that's happening, and I'm sure any offer of that effort would be welcomed. The other part that comes to mind for me is I think there's also an opportunity for us to really hold the mirror up to ourselves. I had a situation where I accompanied someone to the emergency department at St. Martha's Hospital about maybe 3 Friday nights ago. I know that you folks call it the outdoor here in Pictou County, right? Yeah, I always love that term, the outdoor. In Antigonish, it's just called going to outpatients. And so I took someone to outpatients, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with this, but in our area, a lot of the more local and rural hospitals don't necessarily have staff to keep their emergency departments open all weekend. So when I arrived accompanying someone to the emergency room, we were told that the wait would be considerable, and that this is why. There was people from other jurisdictions coming to this hospital. And I noted in the waiting room there were at least 3 people whom I thought must be homeless. One person was in a wheelchair and had one Sobeys bag, a plastic one, that looked like it contained all of his worldly possessions. And I think there's a tremendous temptation for us to say, what did that person do wrong to land here? You know, what poor choices did he or she make along the way? And for me, it's a matter of really holding up that mirror for myself and shedding any kind of socialization to think that way. There are complex and multiple factors that contribute to people ending up in a situation where they're insecurely housed, precariously housed, homeless, whatever we want to call it. And I think that we can all do something just by reflecting on our own belief system, reflecting on our assumptions, and being really open to thinking differently, and being really open to listening to people's stories, and to listening to what their experience has been, and to not make any assumptions based on our own socialization about why it is that people find themselves where they do related to this issue. Yeah.
I'd like to call Marie to thank the speaker.
Clearly, I'm much shorter than Sean.
We all are.
Yeah, I thought that's true. So, Pauline, I want to thank you very much for helping us grasp some of the issues around affordable housing. As I said earlier, I work for Housing Nova Scotia. I am aware of some of the challenges that it presents, and it's certainly at a government level, it's very unique and challenging, and it is a long-term, as you say. But we thoroughly appreciate your presentation. Thank you ever so much for coming to our first TUC Talk for the evening. And as a gift, so can we see this? Open it up.
Food for thought?
Yes. All the way. And there
it's
you
an
go.
apron.
An apron.
Look at that.
Handmade just for you. And thank you ever so much again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Wonderful. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.